This is Newsroom. Hello. Welcome once again from Johannesburg here in South Africa. My name, of course, Evan Jansen. The show is always live. It's broadcast from our studios here in Auckland Park. Don't forget, we're also live on YouTube right now, where the whole show is always available on demand on our YouTube channel. Now, today, we pick up the statue debate here in South Africa. Fighting talk, marches and vandalism. It's been the order of the day. How is this debate affecting us as a nation? We also look at the effect on social cohesion and talk about, well, the real issue. That was transformation at our tertiary institutions. But today's show will start with a live crossing to the Union buildings, where our contributing editor, Vuyo Mvoko, is standing by for an update. Of course, President Jacob Zuma is meeting President Robert Mugabe shortly in bilateral talks there at the Union building. So we'll be live there shortly, but let's first get an update from Anindo Mal.
Good morning, I'm Anindo Mal. Let's just have a look at the stories making headlines today. President Jacob Zuma will today hold talks with his Zimbabwean counterpart, Robert Mugabe. Economic relations, the influx of Zimbabweans into South Africa, the illegal renditions debacle, and regional challenges are expected to dominate the discussions. The two leaders are also expected to sign several trade and investment agreements. The University of Cape Town is expected to make a final decision on whether to remove the statue of Cecil John Rhodes. Last month, students dumped human waste on the statue and embarked on a series of protests over transformation. The University Senate has passed a proposal recommending its removal. The proposal states Rhodes should be permanently removed from the campus and be handed over to government's heritage authorities. Meanwhile, members of the Front National Party are planning to chain themselves to the Paul Kruger statue. Controversial singer Sunette Bridges and Steve Hofmeyr have confirmed their attendance at the Protea protest. There will also be protests at the statue of Jan van Riebeeck in Cape Town and the Kruger statue in Rustenburg. The FF Plus has laid charges against the EFF after the party admitted to being behind the defacing of the statue of Kruger. Radovan Krejcir is expected to be back in court today. The Czech fugitive and three others will appear in the Germiston Magistrates Court in connection with the murder of Lebanese national Sam Issa. Issa was gunned down in a shooting in Bedford View in October 2013. The four men face charges of murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and the unlawful possession of firearms and ammunition. Graphic footage of a police shooting has led to the arrest of a white South Carolina officer. The officer has been charged with murder after the video showed him shooting 8 times at the back of a 50-year-old black man. The cell phone footage shows the unarmed man fleeing from the officer when he was shot and killed. And the UN says over 560 people have been killed in Yemen since fighting escalated late March. A military coalition of regional powers led by Saudi Arabia has taken on the Houthi advance in the south of the country in a conflict that has left at least 100,000 people displaced. Remember, you can find all of those stories on our Newsroom Facebook page. Just search for Newsroom. You can also follow us on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Eben, over to you.
Thanks, Nadine. President Jacob Zuma will shortly start talks with his Zimbabwean counterpart, Robert Mugabe, at the Union buildings in the capital, Pretoria. Economic relations, the influx of Zimbabweans into South Africa, the illegal renditions debacle, and regional challenges are expected to dominate the discussions. The two leaders are also expected to sign several trade and investment agreements.
There have been plenty of visits exchanged between Zimbabwe and South Africa's presidents over the years, but state visits, considered the highest expression of friendly bilateral relations, have been limited. This largely as a result of Zimbabwe's internal political and economic crises. But the country's role is changing, and it's emerging from the cold. And President Mugabe wields more influence as the chair of SADC and the African Union.
You look at the thawing of relations between Zimbabwe and the West, Zimbabwe and the AU. So there is no way South Africa would want a scenario where Britain, EU, the likes of Denmark, Belgium will benefit out of relations with Zimbabwe, whereas South Africa is a strategic neighbor.
Much has changed since President Mugabe's first state visit in 1994. Then Zimbabwe was the regional business hub. Today, the country is struggling to contain a ballooning $3 billion trade deficit, much of that with South Africa, its major trading partner. Meanwhile, South Africa is also looking to expand its businesses, not only in Zimbabwe, but Central Africa. And Zimbabwe's Beitbridge border post is its gateway. The visit will end with the South Africa-Zimbabwe Business Forum meeting on April the 9th. Shingai Nyoka, SABC News, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Now, for the latest on the state visit by Zimbabwean President Robert Mugabe, let's cross to the SABC's contributing editor, Vuyo Mvoko, who is outside or at the Union Buildings in the capital, Pretoria, this morning. Very good morning to you, Vuyo.
Morning, Evan.
Vuyo, what is your expectation of this morning?
Well, there has indeed been a lot of speculation, but not too long ago I did get some insights into some of the things that are definitely on the agenda. One of them is, of course, the issue of illegal immigrants who come into the country. It's apparently a very sore point for the South Africans because the widely held belief is that it is indeed getting out of control, with all the attendant consequences of crime, but also issues of unemployment, including xenophobia and all those things. So that issue is firmly on the table. But another issue that is also firmly on the table, I am told, is the issue of their suspicions from information gathered through financial houses, but also companies that are dealing or that have a presence in Zimbabwe, and that is Zimbabwe's inability to pay its bills, but also to balance its books. It is a huge concern, I am told, and it is probably the most serious issue. Apparently, some of the companies, local companies that are operating in Zimbabwe, have already raised concerns with government and with other people that they haven't been paid, and it's a matter of a serious concern to them, and everyone is hoping or holding thumbs that it is not pointing in the direction of an economic meltdown. So it is a very serious issue, and everyone is hoping that this issue will be dealt with, and the two governments, as they meet today, will in fact get into the detail of that and find a way of actually addressing that particular issue. A third issue that will also be on the table, I'm told, is an issue of trade tariffs. It is, the South Africans seem to, say that Zimbabwe seems to have unilaterally imposed trade tariffs. The reason, or their thinking, being that South Africans are the only ones who are benefiting from the economic relations as they stand at the moment. The complaint is that we go to Zimbabwe, establish businesses, build malls, and do all of those things, but the people who are really benefiting are the South Africans and not Zimbabweans, which is not surprising. If you look at the trade relations between the two countries, it's skewed hugely in South Africa's favor. We're talking about almost 25 billion against 2 billion. That cannot be healthy for any good relations. So those three issues, we are told, are definitely on the agenda, especially the concern of a possible meltdown, given that the Zimbabweans at the moment are unable to balance their books, and some of them unable to honor payments. South African companies are complaining. Ivan?
Vuyo, there hasn't been a lot of interaction between the countries. I think this is only the second state visit in the democratic dispensation. How would you describe right now the relationship between Harare and Pretoria?
Well, it is far from being where it could be, but things have improved significantly over the past few years. And the reason for that is that before, Zimbabweans were quite hostile towards South Africa because they thought that their agenda was largely influenced by Western thinking, but also they thought that South Africa was behaving, even though it was a newcomer in the game, it was behaving as though it had been there forever and could tell its neighbors what to do. But over the years, starting with former President Thabo Mbeki and followed, subsequently by current President Jacob Zuma, those relations have improved quite significantly, but they are nowhere near where they could be. But there have been tangible gains, so to speak, especially for Zimbabwe. Remember, President Mugabe was quite hostile and wouldn't listen to anything that South Africans had to say. But over the years, they they were patient with him and they tried steadily to win him over to their thinking. And that is when you saw President Mugabe warming up to Morgan Tsvangirai. That's when you saw a government of national unity, which incidentally has actually, President Mugabe and ZANU-PF are the ones who gained from that, and not so much, South Africa. So he is much more amenable now to listening to what South Africa has to say than was ever the case before. And that is because there have been tangible gains for himself, because remember, he faced the biggest political challenge to his continued reign, but also economically. Remember around 2009, 2010, Zimbabwe actually was growing. Of course, that has changed significantly over the past few years, but he has seen benefits of warming up to South Africa, of listening to South Africa, and of working with South Africa. Now, whether he is prepared to take that to the next mile is what remains to be seen. And hopefully, at the end of this particular session today, and of course tomorrow after their interactions with local business, things will improve even more. It is, after all, for Zimbabwe's own good, more so than it is for South Africa. But that's not to say South Africa has nothing to gain from better relations. We are looking for, avenues or areas where we can grow our presence. And if indeed what we picked up this morning around, that possibility of a meltdown, God forbid, hopefully that won't happen. But if it does happen, then there is more for South Africa to actually fight for.
Vuyo, thank you very much for that update. That is our contributing editor, Vuyo Mvoko, at the Union Buildings in the capital, where, in a few minutes' time, at 10 o'clock actually, President Jacob Zuma will meet President Robert Mugabe there in the first official state visit in quite a few years. It shows that relations are thawing somewhat between Pretoria and Harare. But we move on here in the studio. Last month, students from the University of Cape Town called for the statue of Cecil John Rhodes to be removed from the campus's grounds. This move gave rise to a nationwide campaign to remove the colonial symbolism from our country. So far, over 5 statues have been destroyed. And in the latest incidents, I can tell you, EFF members in the Nelson Mandela Bay set alight a war memorial at Uitenhage. On Sunday, members of the EFF claimed responsibility for defacing the statue of Paul Kruger in Pretoria's Church Square. Now, AfriForum have launched a campaign to save the statues, saying the destruction of colonial statues will only polarize South Africa further. The University of Cape Town's council is set to decide today the fate of Cecil John Rhodes' statue there on the campus. But the question is, how many more statues must fall before we can finally move on as a nation? Well, joining us in studio today is the Deputy Chief Executive of AfriForum, Alana Bailey. And unfortunately, they pulled a no-show, the EFF, true to form, a revolutionary movement they call themselves, but they pull no-shows quite often. And Mbuyiseni Ndlozi, you confirmed last night with us that you will be here today. Unfortunately, you are not. Poor form. But we'll continue with this discussion because this is a very important discussion to have. Good morning to you, Ms. Bailey. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Eben, and good morning to the viewers.
Now, we've seen the kind of stuff that's been going on in the last week or so. What is your response to what the EFF has done going around the country, vandalizing these symbols of yesteryear and colonialism, really?
Sadly, vandalism isn't a new thing when it comes to our monuments. In the past, we've seen that people trying to get scrap metal vandalized monuments, or people with graffiti. And I think worldwide that's a big problem that we have in the field of heritage. But now it's an ideological agenda, and that concerns us because now it polarizes communities. They attach a lot of emotional value to symbols of the past. Even if you don't agree with symbols of the past, it still has an emotional impact. And when we see graphic images such as a statue being set alight, or where we have a statue that commemorates the role of horses in war, and you see that that is also being dismantled, then it sends a very negative message about the whole social cohesion in South Africa.
Common sense, they say, is often not that common, ma'am. I want to ask you about the importance for you at AfriForum of preserving these statues. How would you like to see this process proceed?
Well, I think a statue or a memorial or a monument is like a beacon in history. We interpret history differently at different times as we grow and evolve as people. And that doesn't mean the beacon has to be removed. It remains in sight, and then, like we've had in the last few days, you can have a debate about its significance, which is very positive. It's part of democracy. And therefore we feel rather than taking anything away, we can talk on where a monument will be relevant, whether it should be located in a different space or not. And then we should also talk about which monuments still have to be added. Also to portray events in our own time, but also if a vision of the past had been biased, to balance the historical portrayal that we have in public spaces.
Monuments aside, they only came into the public spectrum because of what's happened the last couple of weeks and months. Isn't it more important for us to have dialogue amongst each other, trying to understand each other's points of view before we become so emotional about these exact type of actions?
I think we need to talk more in South Africa, because what we see now is that around elections, whether it's national or provincial or municipal, like we have the 2016 municipal elections coming up, then usually we have controversy around themes like culture or history or language, which are the emotional ones and which are easy to use to stir people up.
Fruit in elections, really.
Yes, exactly. And you don't have to talk about the tough issues like ESCOM or service delivery or things like that. And I think if we talk more as civil society with each other and as communities with each other in between elections and also at election time, and find common consensus about issues like our common heritage, then that would be a great improvement. And if this debate has started now with what has happened to the monuments, that at least is something positive coming from something negative.
I would have liked the EFF to be here, and they've confirmed yesterday that they were going to be there because they feel so passionate about this. The question I wanted to ask them, or I wanted to actually make a statement to them, to me, as an observer in South Africa, this is simply political opportunism. It's jumping on the back of a legitimate concern and legitimate process that happened in Cape Town, and now they've taken it around the country because it's easy to attack statues that stand on a hill and talk about revolutionary times.
I agree with you, because I think, as I say, it's a very graphic image if you set something alight or paint it, or even if you put a beanie on the king's head. It makes for good media coverage. And you don't have to do more than just simply say this gives us offence and it's got to be removed in favour of transformation. But what does transformation actually mean? And I feel that whole issue hasn't been unpacked in this debate sufficiently.
Transformation and social cohesion are discussions I'm going to have with experts after the break in the show. As AfriForum, how do you see the transformation process within the education sector, not just tertiary, but also senior schools and even in the foundation phase?
Well, you know that we are very passionate about mother language education. We definitely feel that the result why so many children never complete their school careers is because they don't get foundation phase education in their mother language, or at least foundation phase. We would like to see more of that, and I think that will also help South Africans to recognize each other's identity, but also for South Africans to feel more comfortable in their own identities, in their communities, but also as South Africans.
Well, I thank you for joining us today. That's Alana Bailey, who's the Deputy Chief Executive of AfriForum. We were going to have a debate with the EFF, who are running around the country, throwing paint on statues on the back of a legitimate student protest. I say, Mbiseni Ndlozi, thank you for not coming today. But let's move on and take a look at some of your tweets. Remember, you can send us your views, of course, at SABC Newsroom. We'd love to interact with you. But these are some of your views here in South Africa with regards to this emotional and passionate debate going on. Dodo says, they must also lock up our grandparents since they remind us of apartheid. 25 April, my birthday, says, why are we destroying them? They are the sign to remind us where we come from. Yes, that is what President Jacob Zuma said during the State of the Nation address in Parliament. If we don't know where we come from, we will lose our way going forward. David Seleka Jr. says, are we so mentally weak that we can't persuade facts, rather opt for anger and force in removing statues? That is a very genuine question. Bongile Makinisi says, this is not helping South Africans. The history of our country need not be destroyed but preserved. Good or bad? Correct. Absolutely. That was the question that the EFF did not come into face this morning. Megan Furness says, what happens after roads must fall? I hope this is a beginning and not an end. Well, transformation is very much the discussion point. How do we transform our society? How do we meet each other halfway? How do we maintain the rainbow dream? Now, today's picture of the day comes from Mbalintuli with a beautiful caption and a powerful image representing the statue's debate. Now, if you see this statue, no man, the picture has been, Melanie, really? You cut the picture in half. Opposite the Rhodes statue in Cape Town, this is a young lady with an artistic impression herself of a statue facing off with the Rhodes statue. Beautiful piece of art. Unfortunately, Melanie cut it in half here this morning. Maybe we can have a look at it a little bit better, or I'll put it on our Facebook page and we'll try and get it done again. Unfortunately, sorry. It was a beautiful picture, kind of juxtaposed, but couldn't get it right this morning. Let's take a look at the front pages from around the world. In the USA, the Wall Street Journal reports that hundreds gathered yesterday for a vigil for victims of last week's terror attack, and students marched to demand better security. In New York, the International New York Times, Iran began uncovering the mass graves thought to hold nearly 1,700 soldiers slaughtered by ISIS in northern Iraq. And in China, the South China Morning Post, a blaze at a Fujian chemical plant roared back to life last night, several hours after it was reportedly extinguished, fanning fears over public safety and environmental fallout in a country that seems to be constantly battling with its own environment. But here in South Africa, this is what is happening around South Africa today. We start here in Johannesburg, where Czech fugitive Radovan Krejcir and 3 others are expected to appear in the Germiston Magistrates Court today. That's in connection with the murder of the Lebanese national Sam Issa. Then, in KwaZulu-Natal, Minister Blade Nzimande will address students at the University of KwaZulu-Natal regarding the statue matter. He's also expected to clarify the status of all statues on campuses across the country. And in Cape Town, ANC National Executive Committee member Tony Ngeni is expected to appear in the Cape Town Magistrates Court on, well, drunk driving charges. They were. Now, there's been an outrage on social media over cell phone footage that captured a police officer shooting dead Walter L. Scott, a black man who tried to flee the scene after an altercation between them. The 33-year-old officer, Michael Slager, claimed that the man allegedly tried to grab his stun gun from him after Slager pulled him over for a broken car light. South Carolina police have arrested the officer yesterday on charges of murder. What do you think? Tell us what you think. Take a look at this.
Oh shit. Shit.
Incredible story. What do you think? At SABC Newsroom, you can send us your contribution. Time for us to take a short break. You're watching Newsroom here on SABC News.
We kick off this week's show by seeing how Kenyans are paying tribute to the victims, as well as not only how they've coped, but how they returned stronger after the attacks.
Last year, images of the 4-day Westgate Mall attack saturated front pages.
In the Democratic Republic of Congo, artists have assembled to celebrate the peace this war-torn country has not had in a long time.
No conflict that can't be solved without a conversation.
The Journal, every Saturday at 1:30 on SABC News.
Welcome back. You're watching Newsroom here on SABC News. Now, as members of the Front National Party plan to chain themselves to the Paul Kruger statue this morning, we here at Newsroom want to know if this public argument around symbolism, history and racism have brought out the worst in us. Are we more divided now than ever before? Or are we at the effect of agents that want to use this as an opportunity to divide? Now, here to tell us a little bit more about this is the head of historical studies at the University of Johannesburg, Dr. Natasha Erlang. A very good morning to you, Doctor. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, and good morning to the viewers.
Tough question this morning. Are we at effect of agents that want to divide us, or are we more divided than ever before?
I'm sorry to say I think I have to go for your latter option, because I think that we are more divided than ever before. We've had 2 years of democracy, and there are a lot of grievances out there. 20 years of democracy, not 2 years. And I think there are grievances across a whole range of spectrum. There are concerns around service delivery, a range of concerns. And I think what the students at UCT are articulating is a sense of grievance at the lack of transformation that people might have expected to see in place 21 years after 1994.
What was the expectation? We suffered a low-level civil war in our country for 40 years. It took Germany 50 years to turn the corner, really. What is our expectation here in this country for us all to hold hands and sing Kumbaya? Or must we face these challenges together?
Well, I think if we'd addressed these challenges earlier, and that's interesting because if you look at the legacy of something like the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which had the potential to deal with a lot of the wounds that were opened up by apartheid, unfortunately, while it succeeded in some respects, it didn't succeed in many other respects. And I think what you see now is people starting to say, hey, we've tried for a while to put all of this behind us, but actually we haven't tackled with it sufficiently. And what we really need now is a lot more discussion and a lot more acknowledgement of the anger that many South Africans, especially black South Africans, are feeling at the lack of transformation across society.
Is there a passive aggressiveness, you say, amongst black South Africans against frustration being felt by white South Africans? And how do you see us overcome this problem?
Well, I think it's going to be a long road to overcoming this problem. I wouldn't say that this is passive aggression that we're seeing. I have to say that I think it's really healthy that a lot of these concerns are being articulated. And I think it's so healthy that these are coming from a younger generation, because if you look at turnout at the polls over the last couple of elections, you can see that there is a high degree of youth apathy in connection with the political future of this country. So the most heartening thing about this is that you are seeing a younger generation starting to tackle the questions that concern the country that have concerned the country over the last 20 years. I don't know what the solutions are. I think people need to be able to express their anger. I think one of the problems is that too much of our focus in initiatives like the Truth and Reconciliation Commission have been on covering up the problems of the past. And on the one hand, you have a generation of born-frees who don't really know about apartheid, but know that something isn't right. And then you have an older generation who are still wounded with respect to the past.
You talk about that generational gap and that there's no quick fix. Technology has also changed the game in the time that we've become free, let's call it that. How do you deal with that systematic problem that we have in South Africa in mainstream media and in social media, where suddenly all the bigots have a platform from where they can throw stones into the mix from behind pseudonyms and anonymous and so forth? And this really bedevils a whole lot of right-thinking South Africans. How do we deal with those kinds of spanners in the wheel that we have in the process of democratizing South Africa?
Well, I'm not sure about that one. I think the communication theorists could probably give you an answer to that, but it is staggering how much people feel they are able to express of a whole range of rancid views, frankly, in the social media. You know, some people would say it's good to have it out there. I mean, look, these debates are not new. They have been present in the past. We have had a number of debates over the last 20 years about older statues, street naming controversies. Yeah. But they've been carried out in a different way because of the lack of social platform. Then we have to look at something like the Arab Spring and say, well, to what extent did social media contribute to the uprising there? So I think that the jury is still out on the effect of social media. It'll be interesting to study it in about 20 years' time.
Let's hope that we'll still be around to study it, because, you know, people that speak about revolution often are ones who've never been in front of a gun barrel, or we've never lost a loved one, or have had their family members starved during times of war. So it's easy to speak about those kinds of revolutionary methods that we so often see here in South Africa. Let's talk about the way forward quickly. In conclusion, what do we do now? Do we build new statues? How do we take this thing and turn this negative tit-for-tat discussion that's going on now into a positive, into something that we can look back on and say, well, that was a poignant moment?
Well, one of the things to do would be to look at some of the emblems of some of the memorial emblems in this country that don't speak to these kinds of issues. I mean, I was looking at the footage of the Union buildings this morning. There's a fantastic monument there that people don't get to see about the Women's Past protest in 1956. You know, can we look at some of the symbols of our past that do speak to a more inclusive future, and perhaps look at some of the positive things that have been achieved? Interestingly enough, in many instances, not in terms of kind of regime or state-sponsored heritage. So the answer isn't to replace statues of Paul Kruger with statues of another, you know, male leader. It's to look at where you see processes reflected in our heritage, and to try and represent those processes in some of the heritage art that's present in South Africa.
Well, Doctor, that's a mouthful. I hope that somebody's listening this morning, because we need a little bit of reason to supersede all the emotion that's involved in this discussion. And then we have agents that really see this as an opportune moment to further their own cause. And all it really causes is for all of us to look at each other with suspicion, isn't it?
It does, and unfortunately that is the situation at the moment. I teach a lot of students who are not so clear on what history actually looks like. Many of them are not too clear in it, but they have a greater sense that there is something going on and that they ought to be engaging with this, but they're not quite sure how. And of course, open dialogue would help, but I don't think we're going to get through the anger that quickly, because the anger is righteous.
Yes, the Holocaust happened 60 years ago, and the anger still continues in that sort of frame long after the perpetrators have been put to death in most cases. So maybe we should call for patience then here in South Africa, as this is such an emotive and difficult concept to get our heads around.
Certainly it's going to take a number of years, I think, before we can really look to the way in which people have processed and dealt with the legacy of apartheid and of colonialism. And it also needs not so much new dialogue, but a new vocabulary to deal with some of the kind of post-apartheid effects that we are seeing now, that people are responding to. People are not actually responding to history. What they're responding to is a very recent period of history and the discrimination and lack of transformation. And how do we tackle that? Is there a new vocabulary that we can use for that going forward?
Yeah, well, some of the nice things that came out of the Rhodes debate were things like there's no more, we don't need white privilege as a word, white fragility was one. The one that I quite like is white consciousness, because I think the main challenge for us as a nation is to understand white consciousness in the 21st century, and how do we get young people to understand that concept and maybe use that as a platform for all of us to unite. But it's a discussion we can continue.
We can indeed, yes.
Thank you. That is the head of historical studies at the University of Johannesburg, Dr. Natasha Erlank. We're talking about social cohesion. Well, the division that we've seen in our country the last couple of weeks. There have been agents that have used this as an opportune time to jump all over it for political gain. But let's have a look at some of your tweets, not on this very same issue. We've got some live tweets. This one from Obed Msibi. He says, at SABC Newsroom, the up-and-coming generation need to know where we are coming from. Yes, I agree with that 100%, Obed, but we also need a plan to know where we're going. Chris says, at SABC Newsroom, AfriForum does not represent all whites, and they disrespect our democratic dispensation. Why give them so much airtime? Because, Chris, it was a debate forum, and the other side of the debate, they pulled a no-show this morning. That is the EFF. Mbuyiseni Ndlozi was supposed to join and give the alternate view, but he didn't pitch. At SABC Newsroom, this one from Obed Msibi again. Good one, Obed. Thank you, Ndlozi, for not coming. You have nothing to offer South Africa. That is a very deep, cutting sentiment there. At SABC Newsroom, this one from Neo. The problem we have in South Africa is that black people are racist. Why don't they start with Mandela's statue first? This one from Neo Kalitsi Makapane. Very controversial view there, Neo. But that's the beauty of democracy. You're allowed to have your view as long as it's not hate speech and you don't undermine the rights of others. Some of your views live in live time here on SABC Newsroom. Now, the tweet of the day. This one comes from Brad Coaches. I'm heavy-hearted over the Kenya attack, the Walter Scott tragedy, and the general apathy that seems to surround our culture. That's our viewer tweet of the day. Yes, nobody marched in the streets of Paris when 150 students were killed. No kumbaya and holding hands of world leaders for 150 black people that died in Kenya. That's where we live on this planet. Let's take a look at what's on our Newsroom Facebook page. Zimbabwe's President Robert Mugabe has arrived in the country for his first state visit In over 2 decades of democracy, the 91-year-old Mugabe will hold private talks with President Jacob Zuma to bolster trade relations. Then the Kenyan government says it has frozen the bank accounts of 86 entities and individuals suspected of financing terrorism in Kenya. This comes after 147 people were killed during the Harissa University attack Thursday last week. And President Barack Obama said in an interview released on Tuesday he's confident sanctions against Iran could be reimposed if Tehran violates an agreement to restrict its nuclear program. All of those stories and a whole lot more on our Newsroom Facebook page. You can also visit sabc.co.za/news for all the latest updates all of the time. Time for us to take a short break. You're watching Newsroom on SABC News.
Welcome back. You're watching Newsroom on SABC News. Let's just have a look at the stories making headlines today. President Jacob Zuma will today hold talks with his Zimbabwean counterpart, Robert Mugabe. Economic relations, the influx of Zimbabweans into South Africa, the legal renditions debacle, and regional challenges are expected to dominate the discussions. The two leaders are also expected to sign several trade and investment agreements. The University of Cape Town is expected to make a final decision on whether to remove the statue of Cecil John Rhodes. UCT Senate proposal states Rhodes should be permanently removed from the campus and be handed over to government's heritage authorities. Meanwhile, members of the Front National Party are planning to chain themselves to the Paul Kruger statue. Controversial singers Ned Bridges and Steve Hofmeyr have confirmed their attendance at the Pretoria protest. There will also be protests at the statue of Jan van Riebeeck in Cape Town and the Kruger statue in Rustenburg. Remember, you can find all of those stories on our Newsroom Facebook page. Just search for Newsroom. You can also follow us on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Evan, back to you.
Thank you, Annie. Now, this whole episode started because of a perceived lack of transformation at our tertiary institutions. Is the transformation we see in South Africa's universities just skin deep? That's the question we ask today. Now, over the last few weeks, the Rhodes Must Fall campaign has drawn attention to the fact that we as a nation might be lacking when it comes to transformation at some of the country's institutions of higher education. Now, recently, a multinational panel discussion was held at UNISA, highlighting the need for this type of transformation at our tertiary institutions. And to talk to us about some of the issues raised at the panel discussion, well, we are joined from Pretoria by the Vice Principal of Research and Innovation at UNISA, Professor Mamokgethi Bakeng. A very good morning to you, Professor. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Eben.
Prof, tell us, where are we right now with regards to racial and gender transformation at South Africa's universities, including UNISA?
You know, Eben, I think we are where we should be because, in fact, I don't think we've dealt with the issue of transformation as we should have at the beginning. You know, you have to ask yourself, it's 21 years since the dawn of democracy, and why are we having the debates in the manner that we are having them today, as if we're starting the debates afresh? And the problem is that when we got our democracy, we talked about transformation, but in fact, what we had was a transfer of power not transformation. And the transfer of power, what it did is that it left the structures the same and just replaced one elite with another. And what you had is the change in the race of the elite and not the change in the assumptions and the structures in our universities. And so when you look at universities, you see if you walk into a room with vice chancellors, all the vice chancellors of our universities, you'll be surprised, what's this transformation debate about? Because they're not all white, they're majority black, and so you think that it has happened. If you walk into many universities, the top structures are not white, they're mixed. Many universities have a mixed leadership. But the problem is that was just a transfer of power, not a transformation. Transformation has to be more than just the people occupying the seats. The people occupying the seats are very important and they need to be transformed. But doing that alone doesn't mean that you have transformed. And the problem with the transfer of power rather than transformation is that with the transfer of power, you still have disillusionment among the people, because people will remain dissatisfied because you haven't transformed, because it's a new elite. There isn't a transformation. The university still functions in the same way that it used to do in the past. A Senate works in the same way, council works the same way, departments work the same way. What is being taught is the same. What you have is new students. You have more black students, but the ways of working, ways of knowing, and ways of being at universities have remained the same. And so what you have with the issue of statues at universities is actually an indication that what we've done so far with the transformation project is not good enough. What we've done is only focus on changing the leadership and making sure that you have black people at the leadership. Of course, there are questions about the professoriate. And that's why I warn all the time that even if we just changed and just made sure that we have more black professors, that won't be enough. You still have to do much deeper work that focuses on ways of working, ways of knowing, and ways of being, transforming that in our universities.
Are there institutions in South Africa that are moving towards that ideal, or are we still 100% behind the game? What I'm saying, are some getting it more right than others?
You know, I think the issue of the statues is forcing some universities like us at UNISA to engage much deeper, because you see, at the level of the Department of Higher Education, there's an expectation and a requirement that universities should have employment equity plans and reports and so on. And those plans and reports have focused only on how many people you have at this level and how many black people you have at this level. Now, the issue of the statute is saying, well, you can have those people, but what about these symbols that are emblematic of our past? And so other universities have started conversations about what other symbols are there on our campus that say something about whether we are transformed or not. So what we're having now is forcing universities to think much deeper than just the numbers. And I think we at UNISA have started doing that. We've started, particularly with research, we started saying, well, it's not enough to say how many black professors you're having. It's important also to say how many of our black professors are producing outputs, how many of our black professors are NRF rated, and how many of our black professors, how many of our patents are produced by black professors, and what does that mean? Because it's not just about having the numbers, it's also having the numbers have an influence on what we do as an institution and as a society.
You talk about research. Should we then not have more of a research emphasis with regards to transformation going forward?
We should. I mean, our research, we should, when it comes to transformation, we have to do research that looks into questions of transformation, but we have to do research that also, it's done by a transformed cohort of researchers, because when we have that, Eben, different researchers from different racial, cultural, intellectual, political backgrounds tend to ask different questions because their passions are different, their experiences of oppression are different. And so they ask different questions. And they ask questions that move us forward as a society. When you have an untransformed cohort of researchers, then you ask the same questions. You ask the same questions that might help us see certain things, but we will always have a gap in terms of moving forward, in terms of issues of society that affect all of us. So questions of transformation are important, and different researchers from different cultural, racial, social, cultural background will ask them differently. And that's why it's important to do transformation in different ways, to say who's doing it, but what questions are we asking? Whose questions are we exploring? And what are those questions? And what is that research doing? How is it transforming society and the way in which we do our business as a university?
Professor, thank you for joining us. We've unfortunately run out of time, but I'm going to ask you back sometime in the future because I know this discussion is going to continue. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Yeben.
That's Professor Mamokgethi Phakeng. She's the Vice President, Principal, that is, of Research and Innovation at UNISA. Let's just take a quick look at some of your live tweets because, you know, this is such an emotional issue. People are tweeting live and they want to have this. Bright says, at SABC Newsroom, focusing on statues won't take us anywhere. We need change like Nigeria did to Good Luck Jonathan, says Bright, hashtag 15. Spoomler says, governments will come and go, whites remain rich and superior, blacks poor and inferior. Repatriate whites back to Europe, peace. Really? That is such a backward view. We are all South Africans. We are all sons and daughters of the soil here in this country. As our president said in the State of the Nation address. Moteo said, statues taking a cheap shot at Hussein Ndlozi for not making it to studio for an interview. Yes, it was a cheap shot. But, you know, if you have a point of view, then don't confirm it. Are we not inadvertently legitimizing organizations that do not truly represent the majority of both black and white South Africans? Yes, that is true. That is true. And it's something that we have to look at in all spheres of our society, even, as we say, within our research principles that we do in universities. What do we teach in our high schools? Where do our children go to high school? Where do they get their foundation phase in school? What is it? Is it religious? Is it ethical, unethical? All these questions at SABC Newsroom we continue to ask. The show is broadcast live from our studios here in Auckland Park, Johannesburg, every weekday morning between 9 and 10 a.m. Remember, we also stream live on YouTube at that time, with the whole show available on demand on our YouTube channel. We love to interact with you and we enjoy your contributions because you and your opinion make the show what it is. This is SABC News. You've been watching Newsroom. We love it in the morning.